Chapter 13, The High King in Command. "Now," said Peter, as they finished their meal, "Aslan and the girls, that's Queen Susan and Queen Lucy Caspian, are somewhere close. We don't know when he will act. In his time, no doubt, not ours. In the meanwhile, he would like us to do what we can on our own. You say, Caspian, we are not strong enough to meet Miraz in pitched battle." "I'm afraid not, High King," said Caspian. He was liking Peter very much, but was rather tongue-tied. It was much stranger for him to meet the great kings out of the old stories than it was for them to meet him. "Very well, then," said Peter. "I'll send him a challenge to single combat." No one had thought of this before. "Please," said Caspian, "could it not be me? I want to avenge my father." "You're wounded," said Peter. "And anyway, wouldn't he just laugh at a challenge from you? I mean, we have seen that you are a king and a warrior, but he thinks of you as a kid." "But, sire," said the badger, who sat very close to Peter, never took his eyes off him, "will he accept a challenge, even from you? He knows he has the stronger army." "Well, very likely he won't," said Peter, "but there's always the chance. And even if he doesn't, we shall spend the best part of the day sending heralds to and fro and all that. By then, Aslan may have done something. And at last, I can expect the army and strength and position. I will send the challenge. In fact, I will write it at once. Have you a pen and ink, Master Doctor?" "A scholar is never without them, Your Majesty," answered Dr. Cornelius. "Very well. I will dictate," said Peter. And while the doctor spread out a parchment and opened his inkhorn and sharpened his pen, Peter leant back with half-closed eyes and recalled to his mind the language in which he had written such things long ago in Narnia's Gilded Age. "Right," he said at last. "And now, if you're ready, Doctor." Dr. Cornelius dipped his pen and waited. Peter dictated as follows. "Peter, by gift of Aslan, by election, by prescription, and by conquest, High King over all kings in Narnia, Emperor of the Lone Islands, and Lord of Cair Paravel, Knight of the most noble order of the Lion, to Miraz, son of Caspian the Eighth, sometime Lord Protector of Narnia, and now styling himself King of Narnia, greeting." Have you got all that? "Narnia, greeting," muttered the doctor. "Yes, sire." Begin a new paragraph," said Peter. "For to prevent the effusion of blood, and for the avoiding all other inconveniences likely to grow from the wars now levied in our realm of Narnia, it is our pleasure to adventure our royal person on behalf of our trusty and well-beloved Caspian in clean wager of battle to prove upon your lordship's body that said Caspian is lawful king under us in Narnia, both by our gift and by the laws of the Telmarines, and your lordship twice guilty of treachery, both in withholding the dominion of Narnia from said Caspian, and the most abominable..." Don't forget to spell that with an H, Doctor. "Bloody and unnatural murder of your kindly lord and brother, King Caspian the Ninth of that name, wherefore we most heartily provoke, challenge, and defy your lordship to said combat and monomachy, and have sent these letters by hand of our well-beloved and royal brother Edmund, sometime king under us in Narnia, Duke of Lantern Waste and Count of the Western March, Knight of the Noble Order of the Table, to whom we have given full power of determining with your lordship all conditions of said battle, given at our lodging in Aslan's Hall this 12th day of the month of Greenroof in the first year of Caspian the 10th of Narnia." "Whew! Well, that ought to do," said Peter, drawing a deep breath. "And now we must send 2 others with King Edmund. I think the giant ought to be one." "Well, he's not very clever, you know," said Caspian. "Oh, well, of course not," said Peter, "but any giant looks impressive if only he will keep quiet. And it will cheer him up. But who for the other?" "Upon my word," said Trumpkin, "if you want someone who can kill with looks, Reepicheep would be best." He would indeed, for all I hear, said Peter with a laugh. If only he wasn't so small. They wouldn't even see him till he was close. Send Glenstorm, sire, said Truffle Hunter. No one ever laughed at a centaur. An hour later, two great lords in the army of Miraz, the Lord Glazel and the Lord Sopespian, strolling along their lines and picking their teeth after breakfast, looked up and saw coming down to them from the wood the centaur and the giant Wimblewether, whom they had seen before in battle, and between them a figure they could not recognize. Nor indeed would the other boys at Edmund's school had they recognized him, for if they could have seen him at that moment. For Aslan had breathed on him at their meeting, and a kind of greatness hung about him. What's to do? Said the Lord Glazel. An attack? A parley, rather, said Sopespian. See, they carry green branches. They are coming to surrender, most likely. He that is walking between the centaur and the giant has no look of surrender in his face, said Glazel. What can it be? It is not the boy Caspian. No, indeed, said Sopespian. This is a fell warrior, I warrant you, whatever the rebels have got him from. He is, in your lordship's private ear, a kinglier man than Miraz ever was. And what mail he wears! None of our smiths can make the like. I'll wager my dappled Pomley he brings a challenge, not a surrender, said Glazel. How then, said Sopespian, we hold the enemy in our fist here. Miraz would never be so harebrained as to throw away his advantage in combat. He might be brought to it, said Glazel in a much lower voice. Softly, said Sopespian. Step a little aside here out of earshot of those sentries. Now, have I taken your lordship's meaning aright? If the king undertook wager of battle, whispered Glazel, why, either he would kill or be killed. So, said Sopespian, nodding his head, and if he killed, we should have won this war. Certainly, and if not, why, if not, we should be able to win it without the king's grace as with him. For I need not tell your lordship that Miraz is no very great captain. And after that, we should both be victorious and kingless. And if it is your meaning, my lord, that you and I could hold this land quite as conveniently without a king as with one... Glazel's face grew ugly. Not forgetting, he said, that it was we who first put him on the throne. And in all the years that he's enjoyed, what fruits have come our way? What gratitude has he shown us? Say no more, whispered Sopespian. But look, here comes one to fetch us to the king's tent. When they reached Miraz's tent, they saw Edmund and his two companions seated outside it and being entertained with cakes and wine, having already delivered the challenge and withdrawn while the king was considering it. When he saw them thus at close quarters, the two Telmarine lords thought all three of them very alarming. Inside, they found Miraz, unarmed and finishing his breakfast. His face was flushed and there was a scowl on his brow. There, he growled, flinging the parchment across the table to them. See what a pack of nursery tales our jackanapes of a nephew has sent us. By your leave, sire, said Glazel, if the young warrior whom you have just seen outside is the King Edmund mentioned in the writing, then I would not call him a nursery tale, but a very dangerous knight. King Edmund, pah! Said Miraz. Does your lordship believe those old wise fables about Peter and Edmund and the rest? I believe my eyes, your majesty, said Glazel. Well, this is to no purpose, said Miraz. But as touching the challenge, I suppose there's only one opinion between us. I suppose so, indeed, sire, said Glazel. "What is that?" said the king. "Most infallibly to refuse it," said Glocel. "For though I have never been called a coward, I most plainly see that to meet that young man in battle is hardly more than my heart would serve me for. And if, as is likely, his brother, the High King, is more dangerous than he, why, on your life, my Lord King, have nothing to do with him." "Plague on you!" cried Miraz. "It was not that sort of counsel I wanted. Do you think I'm asking if I should be afraid to meet this Peter, if there even is such a man? Do you think I fear him? I wanted your counsel on the policy of the matter, whether we, having the advantage, should hazard it on a wager of battle." "To which I can only answer, your majesty," said Glocel, "that for all reasons the challenge should be refused. There is death in the strange knight's face." "There you are again!" said Miraz, now thoroughly angry. "Are you trying to make it appear that I'm as great a coward as your lordship?" "Your majesty may say his pleasure," said Glocel sulkily. "You talk like an old woman, Glocel," said the king. "What say you, my lord so Caspian?" "Do not touch it, sire," was his reply. "And what your majesty says of the policy of that thing comes in very happily. It gives your majesty excellent grounds for a refusal without any cause for questioning your majesty's honor or courage." "Great heaven!" exclaimed Miraz, jumping to his feet. "Are you also bewitched today? Do you think I'm looking for grounds to refuse it? You might as well call me a coward to my face." The conversation was going exactly as the two lords wished, so they said nothing. "I see what it is," said Miraz, after staring at them with his eyes so they would start right out of his head. "You are as lily-livered as hares yourself, and have the effrontery to imagine my heart after the likenesses of yours. Grounds for a refusal, indeed! Excuses for not fighting? Are you soldiers? Are you telmarines? Are you men? And if I do refuse it, as all good reasons of captaincy and martial policy urge me to do you think and teach others to think I was afraid? Is it not so?" "No man of your majesty's age," said Glocel, "would be called a coward by any wise soldier for refusing the combat with such a great warrior in the flower of his youth." "So I'm to be a dotard with one foot in the grave as well as a dastard?" roared Miraz. "I'll tell you what it is, my lords. With your womanish counsels, ever shine from the true point, which is one of policy, you have done the very opposite of your intent. I had meant to refuse it, but I'll accept it. Do you hear me? I'll accept it. I'll not be shamed because some witchcraft or treason has frozen both your bloods." "We beseech your majesty," said Glocel, but Miraz had flung out the tent, and they could hear him bawling out his acceptance to Edmund. The two lords looked at each other and chuckled quietly. "I knew he would do it if he were properly chafed," said Glocel. "But I'll not forget he called me a coward. It shall be paid for." There was a great stirring in Aslan's house when the news came back and was communicated to the various creatures. Edmund, with one of Miraz's captains, had already marked out the place for combat. Ropes and stakes had been put round it. 2 telmarines were to stand at the 2 corners, and 2 in the middle of the side, as marshals of the lists. 3 marshals for the other 2 corners, and the other side were to be furnished by the High King Peter was just explaining to Caspian that he could not be one, because his right to the throne was what they were fighting about, when suddenly a thick, sleepy voice said, "Your Majesty, please." Peter turned, and there stood the eldest of the bulgy bears. "If you please, your Majesty," he said, "I'm a bear, I am." "To be sure, so you are. And a good bear, too, I don't doubt," said Peter. "Yes," said the bear, "but it is always the right of bears to supply one of the marshal of the lists." "Don't let him," whispered Trumpkin to Peter. "He's a good creature, but he'll shame us all. He'll go to sleep, and he will suck his paws. In front of the enemy, too." "I can't help that," said Peter, "because he is quite right. The bears had that privilege. I can't imagine how it has been remembered all these years when so many other things have been forgotten." "Please, your majesty," said the bear. "It is your right," said Peter, "and you shall be one of the marshals. But you must remember not to suck your paws." "Of course not," said the bear in a very shocked voice. "Why, you're doing it this minute!" bellowed Trumpkin. The bear whipped out his paw from his mouth and pretended he hadn't heard. "Sire!" came a shrill voice from near the ground. "Ah, Reepicheep," said Peter, after looking up and down and round as people usually did when addressed by the mouse. "Sire," said Reepicheep, "my life is ever at your command, but my honor is my own. Sire, I have among my people the only trumpeter in your majesty's army. I had thought perhaps we might have been sent with a challenge. Sire, my people are grieved. Perhaps, if it were your pleasure that I should be marshal of the lists, it would content them." A noise not unlike thunder broke out from somewhere overhead at this point, as Giant Wimbleweather burst into one of those not very intelligent laughs to which the nicer sorts of giants are so liable. He checked himself at once and looked as grave as a turnip by the time Reepicheep discovered where the noise came from. "I'm afraid it would not do," said Peter very gravely. "Some humans are afraid of mice." "I had observed it, sire," said Reepicheep. "And it would not be quite fair to Miraz," Peter continued, "to have in sight anything that might abate the edge of his courage." "Your majesty is the mirror of honor," said the mouse with one of his admirable bows. "And on this matter we have but a single mind. I thought I had heard someone laughing just now. If anyone present wishes to make me the subject of his wit, I am very much at his service with my sword whenever he has leisure." An awful silence followed this remark, which was broken by Peter saying, "Giant Wimbleweather and the bear and the centaur Glindstorm shall be our marshals. The combat will be at 2 hours after noon. Dinner at noon, precisely." "I say," said Edmund as they walked away, "I suppose it is all right. I suppose you can beat him." "That's why I'm fighting him, to find out," said Peter. And that's the end of chapter 13. So believe it or not, Peter's plan is working out better than he could have expected. They know that ultimately the victory is in the hands of Aslan himself. But it will be their responsibility to do what they can, to do what they ought with the time that they have been given. So his plan was basically to pick a fight. Really a challenge, a matter of honor, that man-to-man, one-on-one duel to the death, where rather than have two armies fight it out, just the two captains of the army would settle the dispute, winner take all. Now, being a much larger, better army in excellent position, of course Miraz should have refused, and really Peter didn't think it was going to work out. He just hoped this would be a good way to spend some time waiting for Aslan to move. But instead, Miraz has agreed, and the fight is to be set up. Isn't it interesting? Someone who is in such a favorable position, now putting himself at such a disadvantage. Miraz had everything in his hands. He had all the advantages in his corner, and what does he do? He gives it all away just to face Peter, a man he's never met, one-on-one, man-to-man, where anything can happen. Why does this happen? Well, his two advisors, who aren't very fond of Miraz to begin with, well, they've managed to manipulate him. Isn't that funny? How even when everything is going for you, if you don't keep your head about you, if you let your pride do all the thinking, or others' either sweet or manipulative words take control, well, you could put yourself in a far, far worse position than you ever would have imagined. And that's where we are now. The battle is about to begin, but no army versus army. Peter versus Miraz for all the marbles.